and we've got a great panel here. I'm just going to briefly introduce their names and then hand to them to do an introduction and start. So on my immediate left is Angelo Cicogna, who's Director of International Relations and Economics Directorate at the Banca d'Italia, which is one of the very few send country central banks that actually publishes remittance data at both a province level but also at a corridor level. Next to him is Emmanuel Sesemambo, is that roughly correct? Who's the head of External Sector Statistics Division at the Statistics Department of our neighbours here at the Bank of Uganda. So Robert's going to talk to us about a number of areas, but one of the things they do that not many others do is look at how to measure informal remittance flows. Next to Emmanuel is Veronica Studsgaard, who I'm sure nobody in this room needs an introduction to because I've seen her talk to everybody already, but wearing a number of hats. Veronica's really here representing the private sector, and she is the founder and chair of the International Association of Money Transfer Networks. So that's the international organization representing private sector operators, and will give probably a different perspective, or certainly share use cases. And then last but definitely not least, we have Professor Robert Mudida, who is, I'm going to have to read, Director of Research at the Central Bank of Kenya. So we've got a great panel. You can see a mixture of send and receive country central banks and the private sector. So I'm just going to go along and ask each of our panelists to do 3 to 4 minutes on their responsibilities and then some of the successes and challenges that they see, and then we'll go round to some further rounds of questions. So Angelo, perhaps we could start with you.
Excellent. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. My name again is Angelo Cicogna. As Leon mentioned, I'm with Banca d'Italia, which is Italy's central bank, and I'm currently a senior manager in the International Relations and Economic Directorate. I would like to thank, first of all, the organizers for inviting Banca d'Italia to join this event, which makes a very important contribution to our common endeavor towards leveraging remittances for economic development and sustainable development. Italy is firmly committed to this goal, and we take active part in various international fora in this field, including especially the G20 GFRID initiative, which we have the privilege of co-sharing together with our friends of India. Now, again, on a personal note, let me tell you that I'm very excited to be back in Africa after some time. This is the continent where I spent some of my most rewarding years back in the early 2000s when I was posted in Cairo as a field coordinator of a technical cooperation program with the Central Bank of Egypt. I don't know if there is somebody from Egypt here, but I'm glad to be back. So let's get down to business. Just to frame my contribution to our debate, let me just briefly provide you with a snapshot of Italy's remittances landscape. Well, Italy is now home to a sizable group of foreign workers, which is a result of sustained inflows of migrants over the last several decades. We now have over 5 million foreign residents in the country, which accounts for nearly 9% of Italy's total population. More than 1 million of them come from Africa, with the largest communities coming from Morocco, Senegal, and Nigeria. Now, of course, Italy's foreign residents generate a substantial flow of outbound remittances, which make Italy one of the largest sending markets in Europe, and I would say also globally. Last year, just to give you a couple of figures, total workers' remittances sent from Italy through regulated channels, which are the ones that we monitor, exceeded $8.5 billion, I should say. And 2.2 of them were sent to Africa. In terms of the market structure, MTOs are the main providers of remittances in services in Italy. Coastal remittances has been materially moving over the last several years towards the SDG and G20 targets, although like in several other countries, progress has been slower lately. Anyway, according to the latest World Bank measurements, the average cost of remittances from Italy is now slightly below 5%, which makes us the cheapest country in G8 and one of the countries with lowest remittances cost in the G20. Now, what are the key features of Italy's statistical framework in the field of workers' remittances? Here, of course, Banca d'Italia has a central role because we are in charge of producing and disseminating statistics on workers' remittances as a part of our broader responsibility for the compilation of the country's balance of payments. So how do we approach this task and what outputs are released from this process? Let's start with data collection. Now the source, and this is a key point, the source of our flow data on workers' remittances are the reports that financial institutions provide regularly to Banca d'Italia due to its role in the prudential supervision of the Italian financial system. So we get data only and directly from financial intermediaries that are providing remittances services, be them banks, MTO, or the postal service. Now, a key feature of our system is that data, both for statistical and supervisory purposes, are transmitted to the Banca d'Italia through a simple, single integrated reporting framework, which, by the way, also takes care of anti-money laundering purposes. The consequence of this is that the reporting burden for intermediaries is much lighter than would be the case if different functions were served by different reporting flows. What data do we collect? Well, data collected from each intermediaries concerning outbound worker remittances are quite granular. We regularly collect on a monthly and a quarterly basis from each intermediary the number of operations performed, the total amount, but not only the total amount globally, but the total amount divided by counterparty country, so the destination country. In addition to that, we also collect data on the province of residence of the payer. In terms of one other thing that I would like to mention is that there is no lower threshold on the amount of data. So every single euro which is sent out of Italy through regulated channels is captured by the statistics. The data compilation and transmission is highly automated through a software which has been developed in cooperation with Banca d'Italia over the years, which serves to directly connect the databases of the intermediaries into the reporting framework. So again, this reduces cost of reporting and the risk of mistakes. So what data do we disseminate? And then I stop here and leave it to the other speakers. Well, of course, we do publish monthly the total amount of outbound remittances for us within the framework of the balance of statistics. In addition, on a quarterly basis, we publish a breakdown of outgoing workers' remittances by the destination country. And on an annual basis, we supplement this information with an additional breakdown by the province of residence of the center, which makes for a number of hundreds of corridors which are reported. All this data, this is an important point. I mean, what do we do with that, and what kind of service we intend to render to the community with them, are available in a dedicated section of our website. And they are stored in a specific Excel file, so it's very easy to be used, downloaded, and integrated, of course, with other databases. I will stop here and then maybe pick up later.
Great, thank you, Angelo. I think that was really interesting, and I guess not everybody in the room actually knew that this information was available, but the fact that it is a good example to many other countries. And I know, without putting words into your mouth, but I'm sure you're quite willing to talk to some of your counterparts in other countries to help guide them in some ways there. Robert, okay, if I come to you from the Central Bank of Kenya, know you're going to describe some of your activities. For those of you who don't know, CBK has actually been very active and really improving its engagement and publication of statistics. I'm sure since Prime started, that was a main driver, Pedro. But anyway, we've seen a lot of improvements. So perhaps you could share what you've been doing and how you see things going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Leon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so from the CBK side, there's a lot happening. And just to say, first of all, that remittances play a very, very critical role in the Kenyan economy. I think the governor, our governor, who was presenting this morning, alluded to this when he said that Kenya is the third largest sort of recipient of diaspora remittances in sub-Saharan Africa. And these remittances have increased a lot over the last decade. So much so that last year we had a record inflow of diaspora remittances of over $4 billion US, making up about 3.6% of Kenya's GDP for 2022. Yeah, so they play a very important role, of course, in foreign exchange inflows, critical part of the secondary income of the balance of payments, also more specifically in livelihoods, so in meeting critical development outcomes of recipients, basically for household expenditure, health, education, and of course, some of the remittances also applied in investments, different types of investments in the Kenyan economy. So getting to the data side, we're one of, let's say, a few sub-Saharan African countries that have basically release regular remittances data. Actually, we release remittances data monthly. We were recently trying to do an analysis of persistence of remittances for several African countries, and we could only find 6 African countries that had remittances data at monthly frequency. Only 6. We looked everywhere. We triangulated different sources, and we found only 6 that do it at monthly frequency. So we do it, so we release every month. This is publicly available on our website. It appears in a weekly bulletin. As soon as we've compiled the monthly data, it appears in our weekly bulletin. So then it's available as well in our website, in the different publications that we have on the website. And this data is obtained. It's formal remittances data. So it's obtained from different payment service providers, banks, and mobile remittance companies, and so on. Yeah. 1,300 respondents from different parts of the world, where you have the Kenyan diaspora. Got a lot of granular, interesting data on basically the motivation for migration of people, which turned out to be mostly most of the migrants were people who had gone for education or work. Most of them were in relatively stable jobs, so that explains part of the stability of the remittances. But they also brought out very interesting aspects like cost of remittances. So now we were able now to get a sense. So we found out that the average cost is 4 to 5% of the amount remitted is actually spent in remitting. The SDG target is 3%. We found that Europe and Asia are relatively more expensive. So these are in the region of 6% of the total amount remitted. We found out about channels. We found out about who they remit to. We found out challenges in remitting, how the funds are utilized, etc. So we got much more detail for that, and we realized that was the way to go, also to get much more granular data. And right now, and I end on this because I know the other speakers also have a lot to say, is that at the moment we're in the process of doing a household remittances survey now from the recipient side to primarily, so to understand that better. And this is going to have a number of innovations. Remember, I mentioned the monthly data is formal, so we don't have informal. So we haven't captured informal remittance channels. So now this one will attempt to capture, because it'll go to the household level, using a sampling frame that was utilized in the census, Kenya's population census of 2019, and also using the enumeration areas. It'll be the first sort of nationwide household survey, very detailed. It will capture informal flows. It will capture remittances in kind, because of course the other ones that we capture are not in kind, so they don't capture in kind, like when remitters give electronic goods and so on, that kind of thing. So that's not been captured. So this will capture even in-kind remittances, informal remittances as well, inbound remittances, but also outbound remittances, which will be a major innovation because we focused a lot on inbound remittances. So we want to have a sense also on the outbound side. So this is in progress. We've already done the pilot testing, and we're hoping to complete it by the end of this year. And that, I think, is going to give us very interesting granular data as well that will contribute to greater understanding. I would say, finally, of course, one of the challenges is we would want to do more comparative work, like the work I mentioned on looking at several countries, looking at sort of trends in remittances, doing some analysis. But we would want some uniformity in terms of compilation of data, because there might be differences in compilation among the different countries, so you don't know if you're comparing exactly the same thing. So it wants some kind of standardization, some kind of broader stakeholder involvement to be able to sort of get more insights and to have, for the data to have greater application, but also now initiatives are rising at African level, broader African level, like African Union level, to come up with sort of regional approaches to attracting remittances, to measuring remittances. There's a great move towards harmonization. So I want to move more sort of in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Robert. So there's a lot going on, obviously, and I think, some of the points I took is it's not just all about quantitative data. There's quite a lot around qualitative data as well. We need to look at outbound, because most of the data in Africa is inbound, and there's a whole series of other things. So thank you for that. Emmanuel, perhaps if we can come to you now, so from just up the road in Uganda. So it'd be useful to get your perspective, and as already highlighted, we know you do an amount of work on measuring informal remittances, so if you could touch on that as well. I'll pass the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and good afternoon to you all. Well, the picture for Uganda is not any different from what has been presented by the previous speakers in terms of the benefits of remittances to the economy. That is pretty much standard, so I'll not dwell on that. I'll focus more on the data side of things. First of all, when collecting data, we are really looking at data required for policy decisions and analysis. So the context in which this data is collected really rests right there. So we've focused really on two sources of data over the years: the remittances service providers data, which has been mentioned by the previous speakers. Now here, what we've done in Uganda, we've designed a template which is shared with the remittance service providers, who then submit that data to us on a regular basis. But like it's been indicated by both Angelo and Robert, that data comes in on a timely basis because you get it every month, but it has a few limitations, as you already know. One, you don't get a lot of detail regarding the flows. You will have the aggregate figure, this much from such and such a country, or that much going to the other country, but that's just how far you can go with that data. Now, the other sort of limitation we've had with that data is that sometimes there's a bit of misclassification on the part of the compilers. So they may include a bit of non-remittances flows in their data. So that's another limitation that we've seen with that data. So in light of those limitations, a decision was made a couple of years ago, actually as way back as 2006, to try and look at the other side or the other sources we could have at our disposal. And that's when we decided to start a remittances survey. Now this survey is a household survey similar to what Kenya is about to start. And being a recipient, a predominantly recipient country, we focus on the recipients. So we select a nationally representative sample and interview the recipients of these flows. The questionnaire is quite detailed, so we collect information on the recipients themselves, characteristics of the households. We collect information on the characteristics of the senders themselves. Then we get down to the flows. And in terms of the flows, we will collect information on the nature of the flow. Was it cash or in kind? How much was it? With what frequency is it sent? How was it used? How was it sent? And what was it used for? Why do you prefer one channel as opposed to the other? So the questionnaire is quite detailed, and we do get a lot of information from the recipients. Now that information has helped us to understand the remittances that come to Uganda a lot better, because right now we can tell you where, how much, and who is sending. And any trends that appear in the numbers can be properly estimated. The only limitation, or one of the biggest limitations, has been the timeliness of the data. Because this is an annual survey, so we conduct it only once in a year, and you get the results after or with a lag of a year. Of course, the other limitation that is known for surveys is cost, because it is a national survey, and that comes with a high cost. So you must be ready to look at those costs as you plan to dig into remittances. The other bit that we do collect, it has been mentioned by the colleague from Kenya, is detail on the in-kind remittances, because we do have a section in the questionnaire that collects data on in-kind remittances, and through that we are able to tell what sort of items are sent in kind, how they are sent, and with what frequency, and all other details that come along with that kind of, with those kinds of flows. Basically, that's on the side of collection. In terms of publication, publication has largely been in form of a report, an annual report that we make available on the Bank of Uganda website, as well as sister organizations like the National Statistics Office. That report will be available with all the details. But in case any other user of data would like details that are not in the report, there is an avenue through which they can get access to that data through writing or sending an email to us, and then we will address that particular data requirement. I think I'll leave it at that for now and hand back to you.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Emmanuel. I mean, very interesting, and particularly the survey basis, which can give us lots of information, but is expensive and takes a long time and a lot of planning. So not for the faint-hearted, but again, expertise here that can be drawn upon. Veronica, I'm going to come to you. You're sort of representing the other side of this utopia of data that's being produced and is available. And perhaps you could share from the private sector side, I guess, what is the absolute need for data? Give us some use cases, and I think also perhaps share some of the challenges that the private sector has, either in accessing data or in the demands for providing data, and also. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for the presentations. I mean, I'm delighted to see how much data is being collected. From the private sector, I have to say I come with a more pragmatic point of view. So I want to say data is crucial for us because it's what enables us, to align our strategies with actually customer needs, and at the end of the day, achieve these global development goals that we all have been discussing today, and we will be discussing in the next 2 days. So I also come with a double hat. So from the private sector, we are the source of data, but at the same time, we are the users of the data. And it's something that is we also at IMTN as an association, we also collect data from the private sector. We analyze it and we produce reports. These reports are shared within the industry at no cost. But we discuss with the private sector a lot about the needs of the data, what they need from that data. Some of the challenges, we face many challenges. We face challenges even when we want to do our reports and collect data. So we go through the challenges of how fragmented the data is. How many providers do we have? Do we have to go through remittance services providers, digital providers, banks, post office? Where do we collect the data from? Then methodologies, then definitions. If you're in different jurisdictions, the way the data, the remittance services providers collect the data or have the data to report to the regulators is completely different. So we work with all that. So I completely understand the challenges that you guys face when collecting the data. The other thing that I have to say we found from the private sector is, even though there is data available, because there is. It's not just the data from the regulators. We have NOMAD that provides the development and migration brief, then price remittance data, and IFAD that produced the remit scope that we heard today about it. So there is data, but we find it difficult sometimes to find it. So I think we have to work together, private and public sector, in collecting this data, analyzing the data, but also a way to disseminate it. Sometimes it's a challenge for the private sector. When your job is not purely to connect the data, we are working on making these flows arrive to the beneficiaries on time, at low cost, and transparency, and working on all these other things. And it's a challenge to find the data. So if I know we have 4 minutes, but one of the things I can say a bit more later. I think we need to work together on this. One of the things I would like to ask is for partnership between public and private sector, and I will leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Veronica, because actually that was going to be the next question. We'll come to that in a minute. But I think, you highlighted a number of useful points there. One is, from the consumption of data viewpoint, it's actually quite difficult, even though data is published, to actually know it exists. And I know the team that developed RemitScope have been working probably for 1.5 years on collecting the data just for the continent of Africa. And, some things are publicly available, but they're not easy to digest. And they're often, even if they're made publicly available, they're not done in a way that's designed to be useful for the public, for the private sector quite often, who would be a good consumer of this data. The other point I think, Angelo, you made at the beginning, which was interesting, is that there's a simple interface from the remittance company into the Banca d'Italia, including at the same time the provision of data for anti-money laundering purposes. And we know that in many countries, the regulated entities have to provide this data on a regular basis, and this data would or has the potential to provide some very useful flow and trend and analytical data at a corridor level, and perhaps even less than that. But very rarely is that ever published in a consolidated way that would not damage any AML process or anything. So I think, data is being collected, but often it's not being analysed or disseminated, and often it's being collected by a different department to all of you here who are representing statistics departments, and you're really keen on numbers and providing the thoughts and analysis. So anyway, perhaps we come to, and Veronica, I'm going to start with you as you went last time, is you mentioned about coming together and sharing data, but do you have some either thoughts about how we could do that? I mean, Robert mentioned about standardization and so on, but it would be useful to understand from all of you how we could take a partnership or work together to provide better data for all.
That means I can ask what I want. Okay. So I think when it comes to data, one of the things is we have, if we look at what we have the what NOMAD is doing with the bilateral remittance data. That's incredibly useful for the private sector, but it has not been updated. When was the last time? 2021. And what is that data? Remittance? No. The methodology is based on migration. So we want migration, remittance data. So if we could combine, you ask for it, if we could combine something that is like that with something of what Bank of Kenya is doing, and I mean, if we could do a combination of some of these, also try to include some of the informal flows. I know it's very difficult to capture that, but if we could, and if we could have all that, at least, I know it's very difficult, but if I could have one platform to go, to be honest, I mean, only working in Africa, I don't have the time to go to 54 websites every month to analyze that data and check it. So if we could have one platform where all this data is gathered, that would be amazing, I think, for the private sector. That will help us to align our strategies, to work, to identify which one are the corridors where we need to emphasize, where we need to check pricing. You know, we are all talking about, I mean, I'm also sitting I'm also working with the G20 on the building blocks project. We are all talking about this, but we are also, if we put everything in one platform, we will stop duplicating work. That's another thing. I'm sitting in so many roundtables where we discuss data and it's the same data and it's not sometimes shared. So if we could do that, that would be great. So I think let's work together on data. That's my message. To empower the consumer, please.
That's great, thank you, Veronica. I'm going to come to each of you, but of course we did see a platform about 3 hours ago. So hopefully this is all a really coordinated and very slick presentation to link back to Remit Scope. But actually, I think there is a platform that could work, and I think what we would encourage everyone is to submit data to that platform, and we work and to provide feedback. What is it you actually want? What could be provided, etc. Now I see Pedro sitting there, so I assume we haven't got all day, but we've probably got 5 minutes. So, Emmanuel, why don't we come to you, and perhaps you can answer the question about how can we work together, and whether that's, you know, you guys as the central bank statistics offices, but more importantly, actually with all the stakeholders. Your thoughts on that would be gratefully received.
Yeah, I'll pick up from the point you've just raised, that there is a platform in place. What we need to do is organize all stakeholders, particularly those of us that do compile data, to submit that data on a regular basis, such that whoever needs it can always pick it up from that platform. I've seen that work under the East African community. If you want data on, say, trade statistics within the EAC, we all compile as members of the East African community, send it to the Secretariat, who then put it together and publish it. So if you need data on these countries, you will find it there. So we need a similar initiative. Now, I want to address one issue on the challenges of data for the compilers like us. If you look at remittances data, there are just a handful of players, particularly the big ones like Western Union, MoneyGram, those kinds of players. Of course, there are a couple of others that have come on board in recent years. But if you pick those, they're still not very many. So if you organized them, because all the data that the RSPs in the various countries report is somehow linked to these ones. So if you tap at that level, such that these people provide data for each of the country, of course that will require some coordination with those RSPs and those service providers as they were. But I think that should be the way to go. Once we tap the data at that point, then we are sure we'll have consistent data, and we won't have issues of Uganda is reporting 1 million as sent to Kenya, and Kenya has only 1,000. I submit.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's a lot more around coordination along corridors, I think, would make a big difference. Robert, perhaps you could share some thoughts on how we can all work better in 2 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll try to stick to around 2 minutes. Okay.
Is that a statistical 2 minutes or an exact 2 minutes?
There are margins of error, eh? Okay, so first is to say greater applicability, utilization of data comes with, first of all, involving a broader range of stakeholders, even when you're collecting this data. So we realized this, and for example, in the household survey that we're developing now, we're doing it together with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which is very critical, especially for the sampling frame, to find out then who receives remittances, who sends, but also a new player there, and very interesting one is FSD, Financial Sector Deepening. Yeah. So they're participating in this as well. And you know, they do a lot of work collaboratively with us and other stakeholders on financial inclusion. So by involving them, then you can ask some very relevant questions related to financial inclusion, related to impact of remittances and so on. And so I think broader range of stakeholders, even as you're undertaking the survey. Then building on what Veronica said, more engagement with private sector. In the case of the Central Bank of Kenya, we've done this recently because we're developing a central securities depository where the diaspora is going to be able to invest in government paper just through mobile money technology, and members of the public as well are able to do that. So in order to develop that system, that CSD system, we had to consult a lot with the public, with critical stakeholders to understand their needs better, involve them in the testing of the system. So the diaspora now have ways to invest as well, and ways to, sort of apply their funds in different ways. And then just, I think the broader movement towards integration on the African continent, I think is a great opportunity, because now we're talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I think that's a great opportunity to also introduce elements of the remittances debate there. So as we're developing sort of instruments for greater trade facilitation, then we can bring in aspects of harmonization of data that also touch on remittances. So I think that's a great entry point to go with a broader continental integration agenda, and then bring in sort of harmonization, joint collection, and joint access of data. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I agree with all of those. Angelo, you started us off. Perhaps you'd like to finish now by sharing your thoughts on how we can work even more closely together.
With pleasure, thank you very much. Well, we're talking about strengthening cooperation in the field of data. And I certainly subscribe the opportunity to do all we can to bring together all available data to the benefit of users, policymakers, business practitioners, academia and research center. So RemitScope, of course, can do a great job in that area. The question I would like to draw your attention here is, in this context, is I think it's not just a question of bringing together and making generally available more data, but also of reflecting together on what kind of data we do need. Because I think that we are in really a critical juncture in the process of evolution of the remittances phenomenon, economic phenomenon. On the one hand, we have a gradual, spreading, of course, which is very welcome, of digital channels, which is beneficial to the reduction of costs and so on and so forth. At the same time, quite, contradictory, we are witnesses in Italy certainly, but I think globally, a slowdown in the pace of progress towards the achievement of our goals. So I think it's time to reflect together on what's going on and how we can act on that. Let me mention just quickly an example of how we are trying to do that within the context of an ongoing cooperation, which is quite a trademark of our approach towards reaching out to other stakeholders in this field. Internationally, I mentioned the participation in various forums, but also national. We have what we call an intergovernmental table on remittances, which brings together market players, institutions, research centers, and various stakeholders. We have launched with the active collaboration of CESPI, which is an important think tank, which is part of that network, and his director will tell you more perhaps tomorrow, because he's going to speak in a separate session, as our friend Daniele Friggeri. So within that framework cooperation, and thanks to the fact that we have that framework cooperation, we were able to launch a survey with market player on quite sensitive issues. On the one hand, their own experience in the take-up of digital channels in their product mix, and on the other hand, the comparative cost structure that they are having with respectively traditional and innovative distribution channel. The purpose of this is that to have collectively a better understanding of what are the forces of play, what are the key areas that we should address to address the challenges that we still have in progressing to our common objective. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that. So it's quite hard to sum all of that up, and I'm probably not even going to...
Can I add something, please?
You won't have time to get an answer.
I just want to leave the question for everyone. I would like to say, can we approach those regulators, those central banks that are in some cases collecting data and not sharing, or not collecting data, and understand what's the reason for that? Because maybe we should also approach them and engage with them to work together. Here we have 3 central banks that are actually sharing data. So what happened with those that don't? I know these conversations, I have it before, Luis, with you, regarding bank de-risking. It's the same situation. So let's talk to those that are not sharing data or are not collecting. And same thing from the private sector. I think it should be both ways. Thank you. And now, yes, you can close.
Is it okay to go now? Well, it's funny, because I was just going to say pretty much the same, but not as eloquently as you just said it. I mean, I do think, obviously there's a massive demand for data, which is great. I think we'd all make a plea to build on the Remit Scope Africa to go much deeper and broader and really share knowledge. But I think the other thing that comes out is, Nomad is driving an international approach to improving remittances data, originally from a base of balance of payment. I think what we're really looking for here is anybody who is collecting the data, find a way to get that to be shared. And I think, as you say, ask. But I think also maybe I'd ask for all of the gentlemen from the statistics departments to try and find ways of getting useful data for other stakeholders that is already being collected by the anti-money laundering areas and so on, in a way that doesn't actually, damage any national security or anything. But I think there's a lot of data being collected, we're just not seeing it. And that's what anybody in this room, if we were told there's X amount of increase in flows to this country, or mobile has moved from 30% to 60%, people can start making proper business decisions, and that will help us reduce remittances and so on. So I think we should thank our very engaging panel. I wish we had longer, but you did a great job, so thank you very much. And Pedro, what you're going to do the next? Oh, we got a photo.
The photo while I introduce the next session. So while we have our panelists taking a photo, this is the moment where, this is the moment of choice. You need to decide. Do you care more about remittances or diaspora investment? And if you came as a team, then the problem is solved. If you didn't, well, you should have. So the remittances track, central bank digital currencies, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies in the remittances space, a reality check will be hosted here. And after the photo, I will invite the panelists. As for those that want to follow on the diaspora investment track, making diaspora investment market oriented, we'll need to go just across the call into the conference room 2. After that, we will go into a coffee break, and we will join back here for the last session on linking it with climate adaptation, which I think is going to be a fantastic panel. And after this, as I mentioned before, we will go for a reception. So thank you, panelists, and I will invite the next panel to come, to be moderated by our colleagues from the World Bank.